Can't
You're
complain.
right.
Can't complain today. That's a good day.
Doing well.
And I don't see any rain clouds out my window, so that's even better.
Is better.
This weather. We'll give a few minutes before we get started, I think, right, Lillian? Let people
Yes.
come in.
Yeah, we'll give people a little more time to get in. So we've got a pretty big number of registered folks. See some familiar names and faces out there, though. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and get started with the housekeeping items this morning and pushing into the lunch hour. Thank you all for joining us today. We're so excited to have you here. And we're really appreciative of EY's continued support of StarterStudio and all the great ways that they do every year. And this is just one, the summer series for women on starting, growing, and evolving as a business person, whether that's in entrepreneurship or later on in corporate environments. But today we're talking about discovering your spark and turning a passion into a business and how that gets done. We'll get to hear from some of our StarterStudio alum who've gone through our idea and build stage programs and hear from them very directly about things that ignited something new and wonderful in them, that's led them to start really interesting and important new companies, most of them about problems that we have as actual human beings. And I think that that's the most amazing thing we can all do, particularly in today's world, not just plain old stuff, but stuff that really matters for people as they evolve and grow and change and explore the world around them and particular needs they have. I'm going to hit it with a little bit of housekeeping first. This is being run as a meeting and not as a webinar, so you will be muted. Nicole Hall-Elser, whom some of you who know StarterStudio know very well, is our wizard behind the curtain, and she will be keeping you all on mute until we get to a portion where we may be able to let you interact with folks. We'll just see how many people we have on the call. If not, please use the chat. We're going to ask you a couple of questions to get started, and we'd love for you to respond in chat, and we'd love for you to put your questions there in chat as we get into the Q&A in the panel session or after each one of the presentations. So thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate it. And the first thing I'm going to do while I'm introducing Jennifer Williams, who will be our moderator and host for the day and our first presenter, I want to ask all of you, particularly women. I know we have a few men on the call, so welcome, but women in particular, have you reached a point where you're thinking about something that would pivot your life a bit and move you toward following a pursuit around a passion? If you are, just put a Y in the chat and let's see how many folks are actually thinking about it. I'll look forward to the answers. And in the meantime, please welcome Jennifer Williams, who is the Orlando City Partner for EY, a very important organization here in, globally. Jennifer, don't let me short circuit that one. A very important organization globally, but she's very important locally. So, EY has done incredible things to support not just StarterStudio, but starters all around the world and starters here in our own environment. I think one of the great stories we always love to talk about is Fat Merchant, now Stacks, which was a StarterStudio company that came through StarterStudio in its idea stage and has now been elevated to sort of global visibility in so many ways, and EY has been an important part of that. Sunira Madani is an EY winning woman, and Jennifer will be able to talk about that, and she's also been a finalist for the Florida Entrepreneur of the Year award. So Jennifer will be so happy to tell us all about how that works. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to you. And there are definitely some people on this call who are thinking about their passion and their purpose and what that means as a business, Jennifer.
So thank you for that kind intro, Lilian. So welcome again, everybody. And again, for those of you that don't know me, I am a partner here, the managing partner with EY, global Big Four accounting firm. My background is tax. So I spent about 20 years doing international tax planning. I'm an Orlando native. So, and have been with the firm, I think it's 23 years this year. So very excited to host this session, and full transparency, the idea for this session came really from a presentation that the Chamber did, the Orlando Chamber, around some of the statistics around return to work and how that's affecting women. And so you're going to hear a little bit more about that from our guest speaker, Phoebe Fleming. Quickly, Nicole, if you could go to the slides around our commitment. So EY's commitment to entrepreneurship. We have been supporting entrepreneurs, I think, since I think it's 1986. So one more slide, Nicole. So our Entrepreneur of the Year program is actually started with one program, and now we are in 60 countries. So we do have a program in Florida. It's a Florida-wide program, and as Lilian said, you know, some of our local companies have participated and gone on to compete nationally. So we're always on the lookout for new and exciting entrepreneurs, founders of companies, you know, companies that are scaling. But part of that program, which I think is very important for this crowd, is our Entrepreneurial Winning Women. So we started that a few years ago, again, started with one program, and now it is actually 750 peers globally, and Sunira was one of our, in one of our classes a couple of years ago. Next slide, Nicole. So a little bit deeper dive. So it was launched in 2008. Again, an evergreen program. Now it's on every continent, and we get together. All the new classes get together once a year at our Strategic Growth Forum, normally in Palm Springs, which last year was virtual. This year will be happening again live. And basically what it is, it's a network, right? It is a mentoring and a network for these women to get together and share best practices and work with other women that have, you know, taken their business to scale. And that's really it in a nutshell. Next slide. In addition, we did start in 2020 the Entrepreneurs Access Network. So again, focused on Black and Latinx founders to transcend, you know, barriers and scale their business. So that is a new program. We have the programs in, as you can see, Atlanta, Boston, California, Chicago, Detroit, across the country. I would love to get something started here in Orlando. So very new, and hopefully we'll see a lot of growth in that in the coming years. Next slide. Oh, there we go. I think we're going to go into Phoebe's presentation. So over to you, Phoebe.
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I am the Director of Research at the Orlando Economic Partnership, which also includes the Orlando Regional Chamber, the Chamber of Commerce. Joe Newell, our Chamber President, is also online today with us this morning. My goal here is really to not overwhelm you all with data. That's what I do every day at the partnership, really dive into the regional economic labor market indicators that are showing us where we're at in our recovery and at what stage, and also lends itself to understanding some of the tactics and strategies for making our recovery more equitable. So my goal is not to overwhelm you with that information. If we go to the next slide, you can kind of see what we'll talk about and where we'll start. But I do have quite a bit of it to share with you pretty quickly. But the end result and key takeaway, I'll kind of jump the gun here, is really to share how supporting women entrepreneurs specifically not only makes our region in Orlando a much more equitable place, but also contributes directly to our economic recovery from COVID. So we'll really kind of move through all of these sections pretty quickly, really just starting with an overview of what is the Orlando Economic Partnership? Why am I here talking to you about this? So we are the regional economic developers for the region that represent Central Florida, specifically Orange, Osceola, and Seminole counties in the efforts of recruiting companies to Orlando. And that, really falls under that goal of strengthening Orlando's economy. That obviously includes a ton of activities and pieces of information. But part of that is amplifying Orlando's story, talking about, our You Don't Know the Half of It brand, all the things going on here. We have a public policy arm that champions our regional priorities. I spend a lot of time in the empowering community leaders section of our work, just sharing resources and data information to give everyone a baseline of understanding for where we are as a region and an economy. All of that rolls together to really build a brilliant region. And so there at the bottom of the slide, you can see all of those different pieces that fall under that greater umbrella of the OEP and the partnership. So I mentioned the chamber already being a huge piece of that. We have a foundation that supports a lot of this work, Leadership Orlando, the Film Commission, the Tech Council. So all of that really rolls together to support those big goals and objectives you see at the top of the screen. But that's enough about the OEP and what we do. We cover a broader region in the 7-county region that is Central Florida. That's represents, before the pandemic, a fifth of all of Florida's economic activity, 20% of our GDP. So it's a large region, very important to the state, to the country. And for the purposes of kind of an economic update, we'll really kind of hone in and focus in on those 4 counties. We're talking about Seminole, Orange, Osceola, and Lake County. That's the Orlando Metro, or the Orlando MSA. And you can think of that as a regional workforce, a regional labor shed where people commute to and from. You may live in one county or work in another. Obviously, that could be different now based on your work from home status. But then we can expand that out into the 7 counties. That's really our mega region, our mega regional labor shed. I'm sure we all know at least someone who, say, works in Orange, commutes to the coast or something along those lines. But we'll focus really in on that 4-county region there in the middle of the state as we talk about really an economic update and where we sit currently in reference to some of these post-pandemic or impacts. So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about an economic update and really jump right into, on the next one, with consumer spending. So that being just where I like to start overall on some of these presentations. Consumer spending overall is up. It's obviously what drives regional economic activity across the country. And it's probably not surprising to everyone to hear that, just that pent-up demand and consumers wanting to go out, spend their money really has surged and come above that pre-pandemic baseline. So people are now spending above a pre-pandemic level since the beginning of the year, especially in Florida. So that's one of the takeaways here. But the other that's interesting to think about too is that people are spending their money differently. And that's what that teal line and that pink line are really showing us, is that, really far beyond or before the beginning of this year, not too long after the initial shutdowns in 2020, retail spending was up and above a pre-pandemic baseline for quite a while now. That's that teal line that you can see really bouncing around there above that gray flat line being that standard kind of where we were before the pandemic. While spending in entertainment and recreation, so think of movie theaters, museums, theme parks, arcades, putt-putt, spending in those categories is still below a pre-pandemic baseline, still below that level. So while consumers, and really I say consumers as economics speak for people, while people are spending more money overall across the country, we're still seeing differences in how people are spending their money and where. And so that's an important takeaway kind of moving forward. The other, if we go to the next slide, the other thing that's really contributing to our economic recovery is how fast people come back to work and what that really looks like and who is participating in the workforce. I'm not sharing the unemployment rate for the region because the unemployment rate actually doesn't capture this huge piece of people who have stopped really looking for work altogether. So the labor force participation number is important to think about because these are the folks who are not employed but also aren't actively looking for work. So across the country being that gray line, across the state, and in Orlando, that orange line. We saw that number really drop off in March. The number of people who were laid off, lost their jobs, and just kind of said, maybe I'll wait this out. I'll see how fast my job comes back. But we saw as that really continued, as the pandemic continued throughout 2020, especially in Orlando, people were maybe leaving the region altogether, dropping out of the labor force, saying that, I can't wait around for my job to come back in the same way that it was before, and I just maybe can't find anything else. So since January of this year, we've really seen that trend just drastically improve in the region, as every month people really both re-enter the labor force and are immediately rehired. So last month, 20,000 people kind of re-entered the labor force in Orlando. New numbers come out tomorrow. We expect it'll be similar as people really can jump back into working overall. And so we're hoping to see that, 5.3% below a pre-pandemic baseline number improve steadily month over month. So consumer spending, labor force participation being those two big trends that we think about from an economics perspective that are really contributing to our net kind of job gain as we move forward. And that's really what the next and last slide in this section really looks at, is just where are we in terms of job recovery overall from the pandemic. This chart is showing us net job gain or loss. So we lost upwards of or close to 254,000 jobs in May of 2020 in the region. That number has steadily been improving ever since, bringing us now to that 144,000 number that you see there on the very end of the screen. So that's about 43%, not quite half of the jobs that were lost in Orlando have now been regained or recovered. And so we're kind of slowly, month over month, gaining some of those jobs back. And so that really brings us to, obviously, what's important to this audience. What has that meant for women? And we can kind of turn to national trends to understand what some of these trends are looking like within the region. So, and we see that really jobs aren't returning equally. So more than half of those jobs still missing. This is across the country. I expect it would be a very similar story here in Orlando. More than half of those jobs that are still missing had previously belonged to women in comparison to men. So that's 56% of the jobs still missing were previously held by women, and then 44% previously held by men. And that's really a function of the industries that were most impacted, those industries where people still aren't spending as much money, and where women's roles just more typically were before the pandemic. So if we go to the next slide, we can see what that really looks like broken out by industry. This is an intimidating slide. Don't let it scare you. We're really here just looking at kind of by industry for women and men, what women's, I don't know why it says series 1 and 2 there at the bottom. Women are the kind of teal, the bluish color, men are the yellow color. What that percent gain in jobs looks like in comparison, again, to that pre-pandemic baseline. So, two big takeaways, and that's really it. We can see leisure and hospitality. Obviously, that's those two bars over there on the right side of the screen that are pretty much the most impacted. Those are across the country. That's the industry where jobs just are still not returning in the same capacity that they were before. And we see that women's jobs, that blue line, is farther down, it's lower, and women are just not regaining jobs at the same rate in that industry as men. And so that comes down to just what people may have been doing for work before the pandemic. Interestingly, and just something that's kind of interesting to point out, a new trend we're seeing all the way to the left, we see in the construction industry, the story is completely different. Women have actually regained more jobs in construction and utilities than they had held before the pandemic. Obviously that wasn't a ton of positions to start with, and that could be a ton of different trends there. There are jobs available in construction that don't require a 4-year degree, or some of those skill transitions worked out nicely from other industries where people lost their jobs. We're also seeing that just the use of technology, or the greater use of technology in construction and utilities, has opened up new roles for women as well. So really the takeaway here is just industry by industry, we're seeing differences in how these jobs are coming back. They're being impacted by technology, by how people are spending their money, like we talked about before. But really the overall average is showing us that women's jobs are just not returning in the same capacity that men's were before the pandemic. And so lastly, we'll really just jump into then what some of these trends were before the pandemic, before 2020, that really play into this. And we're really talking about some numbers that have come out of our Orlando Prosperity Scorecard. So we go to the next slide, you can kind of get a feel for what that looks like. We released this report a few months ago. The scorecard itself is about 2 years old, and it really is an attempt to capture in metrics what's going on in the Orlando region beyond just those job growth numbers that I shared, beyond just overall economic output, because we know we dive into some of these other themes that create a more prosperous economy. We see differences, especially by gender and race and ethnicity, as we really dive into these metrics. So I want to share 2 of them with you this morning that lend themselves really well to this audience and what you are going to continue talking about with women's entrepreneurship. And the first one is the number of jobs at stage 2 companies in the region. So if we go forward one to the next slide, we can see the number of jobs at what we could consider kind of scaling companies. So stage 2 companies are those companies that employ anywhere from 10 to 99 employees. They've passed that initial startup phase. They're scaling and have the potential to go on to be some of those more mid-size or large companies moving forward. We've seen, interestingly, and this was surprising to us looking at some of this data for the scorecard, that percentage, that share of jobs at these companies, which I should say are also important because they house a ton of the jobs, more than 1/3 of the jobs in the US fall into companies this size, that percentage of jobs in the region has been falling over the last really 5 years before the pandemic. And that's really been taken up by the number of jobs at small companies, at startups, employing anywhere from 2 to 9 people. And so what that really tells us, kind of the key takeaway here from this slide, is that it's really easy to start a business in Orlando. It's maybe even in Florida across the board. So it's easy to start a business, but we're seeing then some struggles in how do those businesses go on to scale, to add jobs, to reach kind of a new level or critical level in employment that supports those companies working across industries, really in a new space. So that's kind of the interesting challenge that we saw there, is the importance to support startups, but also that scaling piece, and really share those success stories and how companies have scaled beyond just that 2 to 9 employee stage. And then really the last piece that I'll kind of add on to that is, well, how does that look for women? So what does women's business ownership look like? And that's another metric that we have in the scorecard that we can see on the next slide. So here we're looking at what is that gap in business ownership. The scorecard doesn't just look at those gaps between women and men, but also gaps between white and Black business owners in Orlando, or non-Hispanic and Hispanic business owners in Orlando. And we can look at what those gaps in business ownership are and what business ownership would look like. And this is a funny metric, but we're measuring what would business ownership look like if business ownership matched the percentage that those populations exist in the region. So I'll give you kind of a really specific example. Women make up 20% of business owners in Orlando, but obviously represent 51% actually of the population. So that 60% gap is showing us what that gap is between those two numbers. And ideally we want that obviously to be 0. So we can start to kind of get a sense of what it would take to close that gap, to make it 0, to make it completely nothing. So for women, that would take in Orlando an additional 32,000 businesses to add that many new business owners to the region to make that gap 0, to make it completely equitable in terms of business ownership compared to just overall population. On a more positive note, we can see that Orlando really across the board, in comparison to some of our peer metros, ranks pretty highly for these indicators. That gap is still there. It's not equitable or completely 0, but especially for Black-owned and Hispanic-owned businesses, Orlando has some of the lowest gaps or disparities there. For women-owned businesses, we're in the top half, ranking number 6, kind of behind Raleigh and Las Vegas. So you can start to see what that really looks like and what that means across the board. So I know that was a ton of information. Really, though, to just kind of wrap it up in conclusion, so we're seeing Orlando as a whole overall, we're gaining jobs every month, kind of that steady regain, kind of chugging our way back to where we were before the pandemic. But we know across the country that women's employment has been more greatly impacted because of the types of jobs women were typically working, maybe barriers that women face returning to work. And obviously, childcare is the big topic now that we could really point to as a cause of that. And so we see that women's jobs just overall are not recovering at the same rate. So really some strategies for making Orlando's recovery more equitable include, helping businesses scale even beyond that initial startup phase, and then encouraging women's advancement and ownership in those businesses as well. And so that really kind of wraps it up for me. And I understand that was a ton of information, but I hope it sets you all up to have really a strong conversation about some of these trends and topics moving forward. If there are questions, I'm more than happy to take them and stick around for a second to respond to any of those.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, I think feel free to throw it in the chat. I think that, so amazing insight, Phoebe. Thank you so much. And this is it is a national conversation. I would say in the past 6 months, I have been privy to and aware of a lot more conversations around women pivoting and deciding not to go back into the workforce, and again, in the more traditional way. And I do think a lot of that is around the flexibility has been great, right? And there are concerns with childcare, and maybe some people are saying, I like spending more time with my family. So how do I, we've talked about this a lot for the last few years in my business. I get a lot of questions around work-life balance. And I always tell people it's really not work-life balance. It's hard to get a balance. It's really around work-life integration. And so if you pivot, from that traditional kind of mindset, and you start to think about how do you integrate, how do you take your passion and turn it into a business, then I think you move into this kind of a higher level, let's say, and you start to realize your purpose. And I think that's where you really start to, as Lilian will know, when people start to realize their purpose and turn it into a livelihood for them, then I think you're next level. And that's the conversation I think that we want to have and continue to have, specifically in Orlando. So I think, did we get a question in the chat? I see a little. Oh, can you repeat the number of women in the Orlando population and the number of businesses needed to get to 0, 50% and 50K business?
Yeah, so the number needed to make that indicator 0 in Orlando would be roughly 32,000 women-owned businesses. And so that's, including adding those businesses in, obviously increases the number that you would need to do that. So that's the kind of the goal number, the gap number that it would take. I'm not sure I understand the 50% and 50K distinction there, but it would take, roughly in Orlando, upwards of 30,000 businesses to really close that gap.
So lots of opportunity. That's what I'm hearing. So perfect segue to Lilian, because she's going to tell you how to start and capture that opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you, Phoebe. That was so informative. I'm always kind of stunned at the numbers, but I'm always delighted to hear how well Orlando is doing in terms of diversity, that we really are around companies and entrepreneurs, pretty representative of our population by total population numbers. So that's great, but we need more, and we need more women. And what we know is that Florida is a great place to start a business. And I'll tell you, as we get a little bit farther along, I'll share a little personal story about how I became an entrepreneur, but it was definitely about a purpose and pivoting away from something that was a job to something that was entrepreneurial, because I was inspired by a need to change the world. And I think a lot of us feel that way. So on the next slide, what you'll see is how Florida is doing around the rate of new entrepreneurs. This is a study last year done by Kauffman Foundation out of Kansas City. And it's so timely because it really talks about, if you go look at the entirety of the study, you'll see that there are amazing things happening right now that the pandemic inspired, but not necessarily was all about the pandemic. It's just that it increased the numbers, the recognition that we have to do something different than the way we're doing it today. And in general, entrepreneurship always happens in a time when things don't look so great for jobs. So it was a happy year for entrepreneurial endeavors all around, but particularly happy for Florida, which we see on the next slide. It's all about the total percentage of population in the same study by population, by state. The places you'd have expected there to be a lot more entrepreneurial activity, not where it happened. Florida led the pack. Yeah. I mean, let's talk about Hawaii, all the good places. So we're
And-
among the best.
And some of that is favorable tax planning in Florida.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. They're good to know. And those topics are the ones that you get to learn about when you come through programs like Starter Studios. But it's great and important information for you because it says that as women out there in the world, there's not a better time, and you're among many, many others who are heading down this path. I think one of the things I want you to know about Florida is something that we shared a couple of weeks ago in an investor webinar that Jennifer so kindly moderated for us. But on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about kind of what the numbers are in the real world. In Florida in 2020, there was over $2 billion in venture capital invested in Florida companies. This is amazing. It's not that that's a first. There have been over $2 billion a year for the last 3 years, but even in a pandemic year, this is what was happening. And the average deal size in late 2019 per company was $8 million. That's kind of terrific for a little environment like ours. And when you learn more about entrepreneurship and what happens in raising capital, you'll understand that this idea of valuing your company, of finding out how much value there is in your company to an investor, sort of, and we'll talk a second about that word unicorn, I'm sure you've all heard, but it really says, this is what an investor is buying into, the value that they believe you have. That's significant for Florida because what it means in Florida terms is that our valuations of companies are always lower than in highly populated and very active areas like New York and Boston and San Francisco. So investors are doing better here in investing in Florida companies, and they're beginning to recognize this, which is fantastic. There are also more than 30 entrepreneurial service organizations like ours, like Starter Studios, like Tampa Bay Wave over in the Tampa Bay area. In Miami, there are multiples, but there are now Jacksonville, Ocala, Tallahassee, over on the Gulf Coast. There are just dozens and dozens of all types, incubators, accelerators, service organizations of a variety of types. We have almost 15 in Orlando that are not focused on tech. In this case, these are all around tech, 30 plus of them are technology. And recognizing that we have an incredible number of smart people who are here getting an education. Some of the largest universities in the country are right here in Florida, and 3 of them right around us. It's fantastic because it means that the million students in this state, we as starters, we as entrepreneurs have an opportunity to capture and grow great people right here in our state early in their career and keep them in our state early in their career. And all of this is about the opportunity to grow our tech environment, which in turn grows our local economy, the quality of life for all of us, for our kids and our grandkids, that says Florida is something more than just a tourism destination, although that's really important to quality of life. It sure is a great reason for people to want to live here. So we've got beautiful beaches, we've got great things to entertain us, and great companies, and lots of them growing, even investors growing. And this is what we were working on and have been working on for some time, is trying to raise more of that investor interest around Florida companies. And we know that there are hundreds of thousands of qualified investors in this state, and they're being activated more and more every day. We see new angel groups growing every day. So let's talk a little bit now about kind of the sorts of transactions that have taken place in Florida just over the last year. Some of those transactions, Nicole, if we can go to the next slide, that'd be great, are around companies that have gone through the startup life cycle. And I don't want to, give anybody any false illusions about how awesome it is to be a startup. You're going to hear from some real startups about how painful it can be. But the important thing is getting started. And you see that in this chart around the life cycle of a startup, there are many, many stages. The starting is the hardest. getting the idea right, confirming in the market that it is in fact the right idea, that you can charge people money for it and they're willing to pay for it, who you're going after first, how you build an organization. Those are all things we'll talk about in just a minute, but they all happen in that very early period we call the valley of death, where the money that you get to start your company is really going to be on you. It's your friends, your family. We call it the 3 F's: friends, family, and fools. Those who are not really sure that they know why they're doing this, but they are. Today, there are lots of other options, like campaigns that are done for crowdfunding, because there's new legislation around that. So lots of opportunities to do this in different ways. But that very early starting period, right through to the point where you either exit your company or perhaps take it public, or someone buys a large stake in it. These are the kinds of things that have been happening in this state. And we see that they're happening over the very typical timelines. Strategic acquisitions, a couple that were done here in the last year: PeerFit over in Tampa Bay, Penny Hoarder over in Tampa Bay, StarterStudio also in Tampa Bay. You see a little bit long life cycles. Right here in Orlando was Therigy. They'd been in business for 14 years. I was fortunate to be involved with their very early start for more than 14 years ago. But they had a private equity acquisition last year. ConnectWise, which was $1 billion exit, was a 20-year-old company, but over in Tampa Bay to a private equity organization. Right here in the very building that StarterStudio is in, and in fact, it got started inside StarterStudio, not part of the program, but in the co-working space, was Power DMS. And they merged this year with another organization that serves the same market. And it was a very big payday for a lot of people involved in that. And of course, here in Orlando, Luminar. If you don't know of this company, you should. This is one of the leading LiDAR technology companies in the world. It's one that, so all the autonomous vehicle driving and sensing that you know about begins with companies like Luminar, begun by a guy who was 17 years old, but they, at 8 years into this business and growing to 350 employees and over $1 billion valuation, went public very early in this year. And it was a huge celebration for Orlando because that's a big deal. And then, of course, major rounds of funding. Fat Merchant, whom I mentioned, started by a woman who, she and her co-founder found each other in a StarterStudio idea stage cohort and came together to build this company and grow it to be one of the most successful fintech plays in our region, and is among the top 5 merchant transaction companies in the world. So we're so proud to see these kinds of things happening right around us, and knowing that the work that we do at StarterStudio is really important to assuring that there is an opportunity for early stage companies to grow. And when you think about this, it gets us to the idea that there are, in fact, unicorns. If we look at the next slide, we're just going to highlight a few of them that you may not even know are in Florida. Jennifer, were you going to say something there?
I was just going to say, I mean, hearing all of that, and Joe can attest to this. When I moved back to Orlando 4 years ago, and I'd been away from the city for about 19 years. So like I said, I grew up here, moved here in the 70s. You know, my dad was in construction. So I've got that kind of unique perspective. I understand the benefit of having the theme parks here and having all the attractions. But when I came back and I heard, you know, the OEP, you know, you don't know the half of it. And I was like, that is brilliant. We don't know the half of it. And hearing these stories highlights that. And I'm so passionate about finding more of these stories, because being a native, I'm so proud of it. And I think we're under-respected. So I love that message. And I love the fact that it all comes together in real life examples.
Thank you, Jennifer. I can't tell you what an important feeling it is for StarterStudio to have touched so many of these companies along the way too. It makes it feel that the work we do here is really, really important, and so important to people who might not otherwise believe that they have a shot at starting something. in a community where they don't know where to begin and they don't know how to touch the right resources to get going. So we're a part of a big ecosystem, and we're so proud of that. And that's one of the things that OEP helps us with as well, is keep that ecosystem all connected. Unicorns, these, I bet half of you know Chewy, at least from the commercials on television, but did you know they're right here in North Central Florida? That's $1 billion company right here that you're buying dog food from, likely, or cat food in my case. Some of the other things that we know: Luminar, ConnectWise, Fanatics. I mean, it's a tech-enabled company that sells gear for fans. It started right down the street down here. In the olden days, it was sitting right beside I-4. So lots of these kinds of plays that are right here in our backyard. And each of you, if you want to, have the opportunity to do exactly the same thing. It takes a long time, and you have to have the right resources and support, but you can do this kind of growth if that's what you're after. And the community surrounding you is here prepared to help you. So let's talk a little bit about StarterStudio and how we play in that role. First, we cover very much the same region that that Phoebe talked about for OEP. So we have our core here in downtown Orlando, which is where I'm sitting right now. We will be moving this year. We'll be moving to Orange Avenue, which is fantastic too. So, but we're still right downtown in the midst of everything. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and believe me, we're always looking for community support in terms of gifts and donations, because we wouldn't be able to do this work without that. But we do have lots of support from corporate sponsors like EY and any number of others that I'm going to point to in just a minute. But of course, the city of Orlando, Orange County, Volusia County, and great partnerships with the universities, including Rollins, UCF, Embry-Riddle, and now extending to Florida Poly as well. We are supported, we have supported over 300 companies over time. Just under 200 of those have come through our programs. And we've actually invested through our little fund that is replenished by Volusia County and the city of Orlando, more than $1 million in companies that have come through our seed stage programs. But we have programs not just in our facility, and I'll say that COVID was actually good for us because it allowed us to grow quite a lot, and I'll mention that in a minute. But we outpost these programs to other locations where they're trying to attract starters and startup activity. For example, part of our team today is down in Haines City, where a new incubator around agri-tech is being built, and we are a fundamental part of that in developing and will be starting, where they're actually already recruiting for an idea stage program there around agri-tech. So we're working with other communities, Melbourne, Embry-Riddle, and others around the local Orlando region, to put our programming in their locations so that they too can begin to participate and grow up a community around their organizations or their city or town. And so on the next slide, I'll just talk a little bit about who some of the supporters are. City of Orlando, of course, Downtown Orlando Development District, Orange County. South State Bank has been a huge supporter for us. Orlando Health, Voxtel, Kiranaga Ventures, which is a venture capital firm. EY every year does very, very special work with us, including last year producing our impact report for the very first time, which was an amazing gift. And thank you again, Jennifer, for that. Rollins, UCF, Embry-Riddle, all of which I mentioned, but all of these support our work and support the entrepreneurs that we work with. So I think that's critical too. Jennifer, were you going to say something there? Okay. Let me tell you a little bit about the programs that we offer. So some of you may have come through our 2 boot camps that we've done here at StarterStudio's facility, or perhaps at Embry-Riddle. We do and have done those with a good deal of regularity over the years. And those are really just about the entrepreneurial curious sort of showing up and saying, well, what does it feel like to try to think about being about an idea, and what you have to do with an idea to determine whether it really is a thing or not. And those are quick, rapid fire, couple of days or a few evenings, and that's it. It was really to sort of stimulate your thinking. The next thing that we do is what we call an idea stage accelerator. And that means that we spend about 10 weeks together in the evening, once a week, going through the fundamental steps of understanding and interpreting an idea into whether it's valid or not. So this is really validating a concept, an idea, working with your peers around the table and beginning to test the notion of what you're doing. We actually send you out on the process of customer discovery, which is the hardest thing most people do, is try to find out whether somebody really would want this. Is it a thing or is it not a thing? Is it only a thing for me? And as entrepreneurs, I can tell you, we always do what we think we can solve for ourselves. We look at something and see the problem ourselves and then make assumptions about whether or not others will like it or want it. But we often don't do the work to go find out whether that's in fact true. This is the most important part of that program is validation of the idea. The next accelerator is once you've established that it's a thing and you're really going to pursue it, do you have a good valid reason for pursuing it? Should you be spending your time doing it, or should you go away and come back with another idea, which is what does sometimes happen? The build stage accelerator is all about some starter who has already figured out what it is, has validated it, has a customer or two, or maybe doesn't yet, maybe has a prototype, but needs to understand the fundamentals of building a business. This is a 10-week program, 12-week program that's all around the fundamentals of business, everything from legal to accounting to tax to liability to insurance to staffing to recruiting to developing your product to developing your marketing, all of the groundwork that says you can build and grow a company effectively. So it enables a starter founder to, and we hope more than one founder, multiple founders, to interpret what they're doing into a business that can actually run and operate and get customers. Because the next stage, the seed stage, is all about the ability to go get capital. What I'll say about this is that not all businesses are designed to be, and we only deal with tech and tech-enabled businesses at StarterStudio. There are lots of super resources in the region. You'll find most of them through the National Entrepreneur Center over off Colonial. Lots and lots of great resources and coaches and mentors there. But what we think about is those things that are about technology or businesses that are enabled through technology. Because what we know is that if you are looking to build that sort of business, it will often be a business that needs to scale rather quickly. But investors are not so much interested in you before you have customers. So that build stage is about getting customers. Seed stage is about getting investors. So that program is entirely about how you organize your thinking, your delivery of information, your approach to the market, your approach to partners, and how you find and capture the right investors for you and grow your business through that process and mechanism. And we even have the seed fund that I mentioned, which is for those candidates that qualify once they've come through our seed stage accelerator. So that's a very, very competitive entrance for this program that is based on a number of key criteria. And typically there are things like having more than one founder, that you have some revenue and some customers, that you have a product in market, and that you are on your way with the fundamentals well understood about where you're headed. You just need new money to help you move. So that's the way we approach those programs. Let me tell you about how many of them we've done so far. On the next slide, what you see is that in our idea stage programs, we have put through almost 130 companies over the period starting in 2013, which is when we began StarterStudio programming. The build stage just brand new last year. The first cohort was last year, and one of our first cohort participants is here on the call. We are now almost nearly finished with our second cohort. So we put through 13 companies in that. And our seed programming over the years has put 32 companies in the market. Now, more than 70% of our companies are still alive and active, which is kind of phenomenal. That's the typical fail rate is something like 8 out of 10. So the fact that this many are still operating is kind of phenomenal. And we're certainly not going to take the credit, but we are so happy to have been a part of it. And we love to follow their successes. So we managed to grow even in the COVID year. We managed to grow to double our programs. And this year, double them again. We will likely grow by 50% again next year. So we are very, very excited about the contribution that we make to the community. And we are delighted to be able to continue doing that with the kind of support we have and the interest we have with so many new starters coming into the market. We had a record number of applicants for our seed program this year. And I just can't tell you how that warms my heart as a long-term entrepreneur myself.
Lilian, I will say you should take the credit and some of the credit because it shows the importance of what we said early on. There's a community, there is a network. And so if you want to do this, the planning needs to happen, right? Going through programs like this is critical, I think, if you really want to build and scale and sustain. So absolutely, programs like this are critical to this, I think, the long-term success of these businesses. So take the credit.
Okay, Jennifer, we will. Thank you. Thanks for that. We and many others will spread the credit around, but we absolutely are thrilled to be a part of the ecosystem here that makes it possible. On the next slide, what you'll see is a bit about our diversity. Now, this is interesting because we were a little worried a couple of years ago. Were we offering enough thinking about how diverse our community of participants were? And as the information started coming in, because we'd never actually asked the questions in the past, but as the results were coming in from our starters through the work that EY's person that was embedded with us did to work on our impact report, what we found was that we'd done a lot better than we thought we had. It was kind of amazing because we think about diversity in a lot of different ways. Women, of course, people of color, but also LGBTQ community, those who are veterans, active or retired, those who are first generation Americans, those who are immigrants, those who are over 40. There is a population of people often think about tech starters as being young people. That's not necessarily true. About a third of our folks are over 40 and have been across time, which is fascinating because, as it turns out, if you are older and more established in your industry, your likelihood of success is actually multiples better than your younger counterpart. And that's the studies that have been done around this show that it's because you have a network of people in your industry. You know the topic very deeply, perhaps more than someone who's started early in their career. What we have also discovered over the last year, not included in this report, was that women far outnumbered in our programs men last year. And we're so happy about that. We had one cohort last year that was 82% diverse among all these categories. It was pretty phenomenal. So we're thrilled to death about what we have done, not because we tried hard, but because we are open and accepting and encouraging of everyone who comes through our doors and want to raise up everyone to be successful in this venture, which is kind of really, really hard. I'll say really, really hard. The passion and purpose that people exhibit around what they're doing and what they need to do in order to make it come to life is just inspiring every single day. And so for us, watching and participating with all kinds of people is fundamentally important and part of our very core. On On the next slide, this again was out of the impact report, so I want to be sure that it's understood how critical startups are to a community because they impact all sorts of things. Now, I'm just about to conclude here because I know we could need to get to the panel, but we have all sorts of impact that comes from things that aren't just about the number of employees hired or the number of or the revenue into or investment into an individual company, but also how that impacts everything that that company does. So buying from a restaurant down the street, facilities, services, all of the kinds of things that are the second tier of jobs, labor, taxes that impact the community. So tech jobs, more than any others, create a higher level of opportunity for everything that surrounds it, which is why we believe that new jobs and technologies and new companies that get started that grow high wage jobs, whether they're high tech manufacturing jobs, which is really interesting too, because there's a whole new wave around this as well, that says people who don't necessarily have college degrees or need to go through those sorts of programs can be engaged in high-tech manufacturing and still be very high wage earners. So we're not talking about ordinary, plain old jobs. We're talking about the opportunity to grow jobs of all types that come from high-tech startups. So this is the kind of impact that we've had over the last couple of years and are expecting to have even more impact in years to come. So let's talk a little bit about our idea stage accelerator, because that's what we want to think about as we introduce you to our guest panelist. This is the notion that validation of an idea and getting critical feedback from prospective customers helps you identify where and how to start and how you're going to make money. This sets the stage for everything you need to do to begin a business. And that's the program that two of these three women have been through. Shantia has been through our build stage program because she was already somewhat established, but Ashley will be a very interesting study because she's been through idea stage and seed stage. So she's gone through a couple of different programs with us as she has grown her business. This is critical that you do before you start to spend money, because the problem, and I don't know if you can see Ashley's head nodding, but I do. And it is very much about the notion that if you don't understand how to get started and whether you should invest the first dime in it, you'll spend money that you will never be able to recoup, and you'll head down a path that you might not ever recover from. The idea of following your passion, and this is the personal story that I want to share for you, is that I did my first startup in 1994, and that I was working for Microsoft at the time, a great job that I loved and was just so excited about. But my mother died in 1992, and she died of a misdiagnosed cancer. She lived between two different cities, and she kept having collapses, and she would go to the emergency room, not a regular doctor, unfortunately. So she was misdiagnosed over and over and over again until finally some smart doc said, wait, you've had this happen how many times? Okay, let's look some more. It was by then pretty much too late. And so she died because doctors couldn't communicate with each other around a situation with a patient. That, for me, was the inspiration to join a group of developers who were thinking about one of the very earliest electronic medical records, and to say, we really could change things by allowing doctors to communicate with each other about a patient's condition and therefore perhaps avoid something like this. For me, it was deeply personal and very, very inspired. And no matter how hard a startup was, we were going to do this because we really believed that it should be there. And I was fortunate to be able to meet up with some super smart folks who were already working down this path, and we could do it together. We went through 5 years of that. And I will tell you that I just this last weekend spent the weekend with 5 of the women who were a part of that which we do every year except for last year, that was the most unifying experience I've ever had, is starting a business and starting with a bunch of other women, because we now are part of each other's families and lives forever. We went through 5 years with that company. It was acquired. And that was just the first of many startups that I did ever after. But it was because of that, turning something that was so personally important to me into a business, that I understood what it really meant to be a starter in a way that a lot of people don't get to do in their lifetimes. So this inspired moment for many people, and the panel that you're just about to hear from is what we're going to talk about. And we hope that if you got something that inspires you too, that you'll be excited about an opportunity to engage in these kinds of programs, and with these sorts of people, to be inspired even further and take a risk to do something that gets that number to where Phoebe says we need to be. 32,000 women started businesses. How's that?
Well, let's go. We're on the road. We're going to get there. Thank you, Lilian. That was great. Really, again, great insight, great information, and a lot of stuff I think that, like I said, is not well known. And so I think it's important to get the word out. And now we're going to hear from people that have done it, right? That are going through it. And so our panel today is Anna Johnsy Taramina. I'm sure she can say that much prettier than I can. She is a speech pathologist and founder of PACE, which is Parent and Child Empowerment. Shantia Lee, founder and president of College Thriver, and Ashley Hart, founder and CEO of She Plays. So welcome, ladies. First question I would like to ask each of you, so spend a couple of minutes, and we'll go in the order I think that I just announced you, is what is your origin story, right? What was your spark? What made you decide to pivot? Because that's where this all starts. So, Anna Johnsy.
Okay, can you hear me? Did
Yes.
it unmute? Okay, just checking. Well, first of all, yes, thank you for the invitation, because I'm literally, I call myself like a baby entrepreneur. So I'm literally living everything that actually Ms. Lilian just mentioned, in terms of finishing the idea stage and really doing that self-discovery still. So I think the pivot for me, even being a speech language pathologist, I'm a career changer. I started as a medical interpreter, and I was interpreting a lot for speech language pathologists. So that's where the curiosity of that field started. I went back to school, started working as a therapist about now 5 years. And while doing therapy, I loved it, but I realized that relationship with the parents was inconsistent. And I think that's where I started realizing my passion truly was. I'm there once or twice a week with the child. The parent is there 24/7, yet they're not understanding all the time what we're doing or being involved the way they should. And that could be for so many other factors, other children, jobs, anything. So I think that frustration started to grow and grow as I kept working, and the time was limited too. So there was one day, and I still remember, I was with a little girl, and she had a stroke as a baby. So using her muscles in her mouth were very difficult. I was at her daycare. Mom wasn't around, obviously, and she said, "Mommy," while we were working after several sessions. So I got super excited, and that was a moment that you would really want to share with the parent. Honestly, I just took my phone, recorded it, and sent it to Mom. And Mom was so excited, and that really pushed Mom to even want to do more things at home. And then the question started, is there a platform where therapists can, share the progress of the child, document the progress in a parent-friendly way? Because as therapists, we do document, but more for, company or insurance purposes, but not for the parents. And so for me, that was the moment that sparked this interest or this idea, and just wondering, am I crazy? Am I the only therapist that is thinking this way? So yeah, that's truly where it started.
Thank you for sharing that. I think what's that old motto, necessity breeds invention? I feel like that, right? It's true.
Yeah.
True. So, and it's something that you cared about. And that
Yeah.
is what we're, that is I think one of the keys. How about you, Shantia?
Yes, thank you, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for having me. So mine definitely breeded from frustration within the college admissions process. Currently work in higher education for the last 10 years, and as you all know, if you've applied, you're probably looking at the applications like, what the heck does this mean? And being a first generation minority student, I just wasn't prepared for the college process. And I noticed that it was a actual redundant issue. And specifically for me, because I was in a rural area. So I was on the outskirts, didn't have access to resources, did not grow up here in Orlando. So right up the road there, North Florida, it's called Live Oak, Florida. Probably never heard of it. It's by Tallahassee, between Tallahassee and Jacksonville. But I just noticed that I wasn't aware of colleges that were available to me just because of my zip code. And so I chose a college that was familiar, but not because of a major, not because I wanted to go, but it was the only college that I was aware of. So I just realized, why is it because I'm in a certain zip code, I'm not being informed about what is available to me, and I'm not being prepared properly. So I said, let me try to create something to prevent this from happening, because I want students to just have equal access, whether you're in a rural area or you're Black, you're first generation, it should not matter. You should know what is available to you, and you have the right to pursue that.
So similar, right? Again, this is going to be a common theme, right? You see something, you get frustrated, you want to fix it. I mean, that is what entrepreneurs do. That is what they do. And I think that understanding and having, and as women, I think it's important to have the confidence to know that you can do it. And there is a whole, school of thought around female confidence. And so obviously you ladies have overcome that. So Ashley, what's your origin story?
Yeah, and thanks again for having me, Jennifer. I'm with you. Lilian takes, and seriously, you get a lot of credit for me being here today, still with my company. So I'm really honored to be here. And my origin story, or She Plays origin story, is I was changing careers and just kind of, well, I've always loved sports. Could I dream up at a job to have in sports? And a couple things were happening at the same time. So I was in North Carolina trying to find an Orlando Pride soccer game, because Orlando has the best female soccer player to ever play. Was trying to find their game on TV, not happening, can't find it. And some of the best soccer players in the world are from Team USA. They play in this American League. I can watch cornhole on ESPN, but I can't watch World Cup players, right? This is a problem.
Yeah.
Also, personally, I had a brand new baby niece and was thinking, well, gosh, this seems like there's a lot of inequality, right? Like they're tremendous athletes. Why can't they get on TV? If she's, gifted with abilities and wants to pursue this, I'd want her to have the same opportunity as if I had a nephew. And yeah, I just started like doing some research into, what really is there a big need? Is there like this much inequality on a grander scale? And yeah, looking at pay inequality and just the fact that women get 4% of sports media attention, but they're 50% of the athletes in this country. That just didn't sit right. It's just very unequal. So that is where the passion came from, seeing that disparity and wanting to do something about it.
So let's take that a little farther. And so I'll continue with you, Ashley, and then the others think about this. But taking that idea, right? What things did you find to be crucial, right, for the process of taking the idea and turning it into a business? So kind of, how did you go about that, right? Frustration into a business, that there's some steps in between, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So if you're thinking about, oh, there's a need, all right, what's the solution? And you can go through A to Z of what the solution is. So there is a lot of personal research, I feel, that I did. I would go into Barnes and Nobles and like check the magazine section and see, okay, really, how many women are on covers of magazines versus men? And just like validating that, yes, there is this need. And then it's really, for me, I kind of sat on the idea for 6 months to see if it was still something that I was passionate about enough to devote my life to it, because really, being an entrepreneur, you devote a lot of time, energy, money into starting a company. But then I had to find people, right? So like crucial is, yes, finding people to do this with, or surrounding yourself with a community like StarterStudio of like-minded people who are all after the same thing, so that you can encourage each other as you continue going. And certainly, yeah, was it just me that saw this, need, and a solution that we came up with, which is bringing fantasy sports to women's sports and hoping that would help bridge the gap. Yeah, is it just me that wants to play it, or are there lots of other people? So definitely that customer research.
And how long was that before you was it 6 months, or was it about a year before you started to maybe realize or become viable? Like, what was that timeline?
Yeah, so idea to like starting the company was 7 months. And then I think starting the company to like finding StarterStudio and being in an ideation program, maybe another 6 months, maybe 4 months.
Okay, so it takes, like you said, a little bit of time, a little bit of investment. It's not going to necessarily happen overnight, and it takes persistence. So
Yeah, and I can definitely piggyback off that. So for
yeah,
me,
perfect.
for me, I actually started right in the middle of the pandemic. So I launched in March of 2020, which is very interesting for everyone. Don't sit and wait and think, oh my gosh, is this the right time? It's always the right time. You're living and breathing. Right now is the right time. So I launched right in the middle of a pandemic, and I decided, how can I really ensure that this will be profitable? How can I ensure that this will even make it past my thoughts, right? So I said, I want to test it out. And I literally just put it in a couple of Facebook groups, launched a post, and I said, hey, I noticed a lot of students are being impacted by not being able to walk across the stage because of the pandemic. And I just wanted to host a virtual graduation. And we had over 150 students just sign up. I had not advertised anything. I just started advertising. And with that, from those students, by me introducing my company, I was then able to implement a mentoring program. And then that's where I actually started validating my idea. So I did mine a little different because I didn't do any research. I just was sparked by a movement, sparked by my desire, what I've noticed happening. And then I said, okay, I'm going to take these students that have signed up and get them to come into my mentoring program. And then that's where I actually started building out the actual viable business idea. So mine was actually a little different.
And how about how long? What was your timeline?
So for me, I would say a year altogether, because I did the virtual graduation, and then that's when I started advertising for the mentoring. So I would say a year.
Okay. Okay. So very similar. So Anna Johnson.
Yes, that's really interesting. I think that experience, that sparking moment, really was towards the end of 2019. So that's been in my head now that I'm hearing everyone, like, that's been in my head for a long time. And I think it goes back to what you were saying, Ms. Jennifer, about that confidence, right? Like, to me, it's like, oh, is it not? I have no tech background, no business background. So to me, it was just an idea. And I think through COVID, that downtime we had, kind of that voice kind of came back to me. And that's where I was like, you know what, I just need to put myself out there, ask, talk to more therapists from different settings. They were experiencing the same frustration. And that pushed me even more to look for a place really like StarterStudio. Like, am I crazy? Am I, is this just me? What do I need to learn more to really validate the idea? So, and I'm truly still in that stage, really validating the idea, customer discovery, and hoping to create a product really soon.
So, and I'm with you. I hear you. And, it's funny. I like I said, I read a lot of things around confidence. And again, I hear a lot of my male counterparts. It's, it's kind of fake it till you make it. I mean, you really have to project that confidence. You have to, you cannot always have self-validation. It just may take some time, and you have to just keep that spark going. And that is it's a big difference. We internalize so much as women, and we tend to, judge ourselves, rate ourselves internally, and you have to get out of that mindset and, fake it till you make it. And we've got a really good question, and I was actually going to ask this. So we'll go ahead to Dana asking, how and where did you find the right people to help support your business when you were ready to grow? So that was posed to Ashley, but I would say I think for sure Shantia can also weigh in on that. But Ashley, that's a good one.
Yeah.
How'd you get the money?
Typing in a thing. So what we did at first, I actually pitched it to some of my best friends from college saying, hey, I want to build this thing. I know how to run a company. I don't know how to build one. And they part-time said, okay, great. Yeah, let's see how this works. We had no idea what we were doing. So I don't know that I'd recommend that, but that's what I did. I just found people around me that were smarter than me. And then for funds, we started with Kickstarter and, reaching out to family that could help. We knew their gift would help us, take off in that goal. But we did crowdfunding, and then it's just, calling family and friends until you are meeting people. And then I was researching accelerators in Orlando and found StarterStudio.
Thank you. Shantia, how about you?
The right people, I would say honestly, networking. When I joined StarterStudio, it was phenomenal. I met some amazing people. I actually still keep in touch with a few of them from the program. And I would say for me, the most important part was networking, putting yourself out there, letting people know what you do, what you need. I believe Krista asked the question on how did I get started in a tech platform. So I do want to just go ahead and add that in here. Honestly, I had no desire to start tech. I started as consulting. I just wanted to do educational consulting, give feedback. And then one day I was reading something and I noticed that schools were looking for people to come in and build a college and career readiness platform. And I was like, oh, I can do this. Literally no skill set whatsoever with technology. And I hired a tech developer. And that's how I ended up really honestly getting my business out there. And it didn't form until I joined the StarterStudio, because I didn't know about a lean model. I didn't know about half of the stuff that I learned in there. I had zero clue. I just knew I had the idea, and I would definitely encourage you to go for it, even though you seem crazy, because I did get a $50,000 investment from a company here in St. Petersburg. Soon as I got out of the build stage, not one customer, just my idea, because they love the problem that I was solving.
Yep.
Well, you did have some LOIs. So you had letters of intent from and contracts from school boards.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
You
but
did
I didn't
you
have
had something an
any
investor wanted.
customer.
So there you go.
That's amazing. But that, again, that's the other thing, the other takeaway, right? If you don't ask, you don't get. And so we should not think people are going to see what great jobs we're doing. Let me give you the money. No, you need to ask, right? You need to, again, have the confidence to ask for what you want. And that is something that I think I'm constantly still learning for, even in my own career. I think one question, Ashley, I think that comes to mind for you is that, sometimes founders can feel pressured, right, to make things happen quickly, right? Or there's a looming deadline. How do you, what is your experience with this? How do you kind of temper or manage expectations?
Yeah, I actually really struggled with this early on, because I felt like I had such a unique idea. There's nothing fantasy sports in the women's sports industry, but there's no stopping a bigger player from starting it, right? And so I did put this pressure on myself of I've got to go super fast. And I think the reality is no, you have to go wisely. You have to go at a pace that's wise. And it might be you need to move, but do you have things set in place to where it's a wise move? I've found, at least in my industry, that there's plenty of space, right? So someone else might still come and do something, but there's enough creativity and space in the world of sports, at least, for me to still come along on my own timeline. So I do think that's something that, yeah, we put on ourselves, and it's usually not the case. It's usually not this scarcity mentality of, oh, I gotta be first and I gotta, cut all the corners and not sleep and like give all my money, no, breathe and just, go wisely.
Yep, find your Zen place. That's what I call it. So we have another question from the audience. So how are you all growing from here? So who wants to start with this one? Anna Johnson, you want to start? How are you all growing from here?
Yeah, honestly, I think just being part of this panel to me is already an indication that, I'm growing, I put myself out there and I got this opportunity. So you truly don't know until you put yourself out there. And again, I just graduated from the idea stage in June. I'm pumped, I like what Ashley was just saying is just, kind of breathe and, not pace your, definitely pace yourself and, start talking to people. And I kind of go back to that last question, finding the right people. And again, that's where I'm at, just talking and networking. And so, but again, to me, this opportunity is, for me, a way to say, yes, you're moving forward. You really are. And as a therapist, we're trained and we're learning to really appreciate the baby steps, So I think that's something I'm kind of translating also in this new journey as an entrepreneur is like appreciating those baby steps because they really are key to that big picture. So yeah, that's where I'm at with that.
That's awesome. I'm so excited that we can be part of your growth journey. That is so awesome. So Shantia, how are you growing from here?
I don't even recognize myself anymore. So that's how I am growing. I am completely different from when I started. And honestly, just very humbled that I was, selected to, fulfill this as my purpose. And that's what I truly feel. I did try to chase money at first. It's never going to happen. So you definitely want to chase something that is purposeful and impactful. And for me, I think my biggest growth has been to stop trying to force things because, of course, I wanted to be a millionaire yesterday, but I realized that you have to make $1 first before you can make 1 million. So I think that's the biggest growth for me. And like I said, I'm unrecognizable, and I'm just very appreciative for the people that I've met along my journey.
Excellent. And Ashley, how about you?
Gosh, both of those were so inspiring. I'm like so proud. That's why you have to surround yourself with people who are in this space, right? Like you just get fired up to go take on the day. Yeah, I will say that I'm now 2.5 years in with my company, probably 1.5 years since I started at StarterStudio. And yeah, when you're in it, you can be so tunnel focused that you don't celebrate those baby steps, right? On agency. And so it's amazing to look back to 1.5 years and see where we are. So yeah, we did do seed stage, and we're able to invest in getting a fantasy sports app that should be out for beta testing in 3 weeks.
Woo-hoo!
So really exciting. Yeah.
Very exciting.
And I will say too, like the growth, and this is again where it comes to purpose, and like what you're able to bring to the table. I feel like right now, the most valuable thing that I hold for my company is the relationships that I've made in the industry. I've had people on a podcast that are like commissioners of sports leagues. And it's like, who the heck would come on? I'm 1.5 years into this industry. So really like not just doing it for networking's sake, but what am I bringing to the table? What opportunities am I bringing to, provide exposure to these people that aren't getting exposure, or whatever your idea and industry is. How are you coming to the table saying, I want to be a help. I want to be a part that helps the whole industry grow. That's the most valuable thing that I hold right now as we're about to get the product out and hopefully launch from there.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I think that's another thing that as women, we tend to miss the value of relationships, the value of networking. Everything comes down to relationships. And again, I think Lilian, you said it really well, right? You did something in the 90s. You continue to start businesses, I mean, it is not always one and done, right? It is the relationships that you build, the connections that you make, and the connections that you make for others. And that is so important. And so that's all part of a community that we should be building. And I think, and I believe as women, we do that naturally, and we should definitely flex that muscle. So I know we're down to 3 minutes, and I know it went by so quickly. So I think, Lilian, I want to turn it back over to you, unless, do any of our ladies on the panel have 30 seconds, one piece of advice that you would give to anybody in the audience as they're thinking about possibly pivoting? Why don't we
I'll
start
go
with
first.
Okay, go, Shanti.
Okay. All right. So my 30-second advice is practice your pitch. Practice pitching in front of the mirror, in front of, I don't care. I practice in front of my 10-year-old nephew, and I say, what would you rate me 1 to 10? And he's like, oh, an 8. I'm like, an 8. So how can I become a 10? So practice, because you will be on audiences like this. You'll be on small, you'll be on large, and you want to just ensure that you're capturing their attention right away.
Great advice. John C.
Yes, I'll say just do it. Even if you're fearful or questioning, just do it, because the results just outweigh that self-doubt that you may have. So just do it.
Okay, and Ashley, bring it home.
2 quick things. One would be, there is a lot of work in like self-confidence, I feel, for a lot of women, and that you belong in this space. And if you're the expert, you get to be the expert. There's not pride in that, but it's self-confidence, right? And then 2, like, don't be afraid of talking about money. There are people in this space. You can certainly get up with me, because I love to talk to people about how to ask for money. It's not a scary thing, but for a lot of us, it is, because of either background or whatever. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask people to invest in what you believe in. So yeah.
Excellent. So practice, just do it, have confidence, and no fear. I love it. Thank you, ladies. And Lilian, a question for you. When does the next idea stage cohort start at StarterStudio? What's the next one?
So I think it's scheduled for the end of August. You should be seeing announcements. Please watch. It's scheduled for the first week of September. You should watch for announcements about the application opening up here really soon. If you are not following us on our social media, please do. We'll go back. Thank you, Nicole. We'll go back in a second to the upcoming things in the session in the series this summer, but make sure you follow us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Insta, on Facebook. We're everywhere. and definitely you can see that stuff coming. So follow us, reach out on LinkedIn to link any of us. Make sure you share this with friends so that anybody you know has an opportunity to apply as well. This is exciting stuff, and we are so thrilled to have as many participants, and particularly women, as we possibly can, because we do have to fill that gap here. We are doing so well on this metric in our community, and we just can do better. I know we can. So please jump on board, get your application in. Let's see all kinds of groovy ideas come through and help you get onto the next step. We do have the rest of the summer series too we want to talk about. So EY is sponsoring 2 more of these sessions. We'll be talking about sort of the next levels, finding your footing when you're growing and sort of in the growth stage. Will be the next webinar that we do on the 5th of August, same time, same bat channel. I don't think they say that anymore, do they? Just saying. Okay, my gray hair tells the tale. And then the last one is Lead Like a Boss at the end of August, where we're really going to be talking about, and with women who have moved far along the trajectory, whether it's in a corporate setting or in their own business. We do want you to know, and I think this came up in a lot of that conversation, that it takes time. This is not something that happens overnight. There's a lot of time and investment of your time and your energy and that of others in getting you where you need to go. And when you saw the exits early on in that chart that I put up, you see that it's a 5, 7, 10, 20-year journey. It can be. So know that there's a lot that goes fast, and then there are other things that go slow. It will feel just like COVID all over again, but it's important and it will last forever if you do it well and do it with the right people. So make sure that you engage with us and follow us on LinkedIn, see what's happening, what people are talking about. And we are just absolutely delighted that you all joined us today. And we're looking forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, Lilian. And yes, to everybody that's still with us, thank you so much. And this will be, I think, accessible on the StarterStudio website or Instagram. We did record it. So feel free to share it. Please sign up for the August 5th session and we will see you then. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
And thank you, Jennifer. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good day.